This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
I'd like to call our May 20th, 2020 Board of Finance meeting to order. Unique situation. I'd like to establish some protocols in which our Board of Finance meeting will be conducted so that everyone is clearly heard and votes clearly recorded. I ask, when not recognized by the chair, your phone should be on mute to eliminate any background noise. The chair will recognize individuals for each agenda item, at which time the member may pose a question or state a position related to the agenda item being discussed. That individual will be given a 5-minute time limit for each agenda item per round of discussion. Once everyone has had a chance to speak, the second round will follow the first. After the second round is completed, the chair will entertain a motion to call the question. If the motion fails, a third round of discussion will follow, and so on. If the motion passes, discussion on the agenda item will end, the appropriate motion or resolution will be made, and a vote taken. I decided to recognize members based on years of service to the board. The order of rotation will be Mr. Frieda, Mr. Hallahan, Mr. Donahue, Ms. Fiscal, Mr. Leonis, Ms. Barrett. First item on our agenda, minutes of our Board of Finance regular meeting held on February 19th, 2020. I'm assuming everyone's had a chance to look at it and review it. I ask if anyone has a question. Mr. Frieda, is there any question to that minute of that meeting?
No.
Mr. Hallahan?
No.
Mr. Doheny?
No.
Ms. Fiscal?
No.
Mr. Leonis?
No.
Ms. Barrett?
No.
I make a motion that the minutes of February 19th meeting be approved as submitted. Can I have a second? I ask.
Second.
Having a second, again, we will roll call for approval. Mr. Frieda?
Approved.
Mr. Hallahan?
Aye.
Mr. Donahue?
Approved.
Ms. Fiscal?
Approved.
Mr. Leonis?
Approved.
Ms. Barrett?
Yes, approved.
And Mr. Monaco approves as well. New business reports, budgets, revenues, special funds, and Board of Ed. I would request, Mrs. Sankowski, if you can just jot down the questions that each member gives you, and we try and answer them one person at a time. I don't think there should be a lot of questions, but it seems like the most plausible way of approaching that. So, I assume Mr. Frieda would have no questions.
No.
Mr. Hallahan, do you have any questions related to revenue, expenses, special fund, and Board of Ed?
Not at this time.
Mr. Doheny, do you have any questions related to those agenda items?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Fiscal, do you have any questions or statements related to those agenda items?
Yes, I have a question on the expenditures for page 10.
Okay.
Ed, animal control, I see overtime, on-call, and veterinary fees are all up. Are they related? I guess there are a lot of calls now for wild animals. Just curious because it...
You know, Dan, I think what happens in a lot of cases is the vet doesn't send the bills over right away, so we'll get a 6-month bill all at once, and Dave will have to go through it. So that could be that's my best guess. I've seen that happen before.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to interrupt. I'm having a little trouble hearing Mr. Swinkowski. This is Mr. Donahue.
Ed, can you speak a little louder, if possible? Diane, did you have anything else?
Mr. Chair?
Not at this time, no.
Mr. Chair, it's Mike.
Yes, Mr. Frieda.
Two things. First of all, I want to let everyone know Ed is really under the weather, so his voice might be somewhat compromised. So he'll do the best he can, and there is a chance, because he's really not feeling well, he may have to drop off the call. But he agreed to come on and stay, and he's planning to stay till the end. Diane, to further answer your question, during this pandemic, what we've seen something very good happen, and that is most of our shelters are vacated now. As people during these times, they're adopting pets out of the shelters. But that is also, it's sort of a odd paradox. They're spending more time out on wildlife calls, and that's to your point. We see they're out on coyote calls, they're out on deers, they're out on the wildlife that's been killed in roadways, so that's a big part of that also.
Dan, did you have any further questions?
Yeah, I had something on streets and roads. So there's some increases, Ed, like maintenance of equipment, like it's something unforeseen, or I see we're encumbering, so just curious.
What page, Diane?
I'm sorry, page 13.
Garage equipment and supplies and uniforms and shoes, those items that are encumbered?
Maintenance. I was looking at maintenance and supply. Yeah, supplies.
Dan, I think because of our office being a little disheveled these days, some of these encumbrances are probably going to be cleared up. I noticed there's an encumbrance for winter supplies, and I know that would probably be zero at this point. It just hasn't been addressed. And the equipment, there might be something in there, but because equipment's always constantly breaking down over there because a lot of it's old, even though we continually try to replace it. And materials and supplies, that's another one I'd have to double check because maybe that encumbrance will drop by quite a bit.
Okay. All right, thank you, Ed. It makes sense. It makes sense on the winter supplies. It kind of caught my attention.
Yeah, that should be going.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We're good, Diane?
Yep.
Mr. Leonis, any questions?
Well, I was going to mention streets and roads. I'd go back to page 10, please. My concerns are the fire department's overall budget is fine, but there was two issues that raised my eyebrow. One was the heating plant maintenance and the building maintenance. Close to $18,000 for both of them, and I'm just wondering why we're incurring that type of repair on new buildings.
Mrs. Zakowski, any idea what those expenses were for recently?
No, that's a question I'm going to have to run by Paul because although we approve everything in our office, I don't always go through all the details of why or what happened.
All right, if you can just pop an email, I'll disseminate it to the board members.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Leonis?
Well, this is page 1, everybody. This is going to put a smile on everybody's face. Town clerk. Halfway down, you have indices service. What is that? I don't know. I looked up the word indices also. It still doesn't clarify it for me. Can somebody help me out there?
Well, I'm going to interject and say, Stacy, what is that? Stacy dropped off already.
No, I'm here.
What is? You have a line item called indices services. It was budgeted at $16,000.
The word is indices, and it's the plural for index.
Index services.
So basically what that is that they've decided to make a change on my line item with regard to how I update and keep my online services current.
Thank you, Stacy. You got anything else, Jim?
I'm all set. Thank you.
I lost mine. Ms. Barrett?
Yes, I have a couple questions. On page 9, I'm just wondering, I'm assuming because all of the schools are closed, I'm just wondering how is it that the supernumeraries were paid $19,699 for April, given that the schools were closed? And I think I recall that during his May 14th presentation, Mr. Frieda had said in response to a question that was posed that they would be partially paid for March, but not at all for April. But I'm seeing in the report here that, in fact, they were paid.
No, I did not say that. What I said was that they were currently not being paid, but they were paid for a period beyond March. The reason is that during that time, we had to be very careful that we were evaluating where the school system was going to go and if and when the school system was opening. So the police department, because that's part of the PD budget, the police department decided to hold on with my approval because we didn't want to lose any SROs in the event school opened back up. But then in April, recently, Chief McLaughlin informed all the supernumeraries that they would not be paid.
So that's starting in the month of May?
No, it already started.
Yeah, that's what I mean, for
right.
the month that we're currently in.
Right.
But it didn't start for the month of April.
It started within the past 2 weeks.
I see. Okay. All right. I was confused by that because I knew that this kids had been out of school since March. So it was okay. So the second question that I have again under expenditures is on page 11, and it's the same kind of issue, which is under fire department. I'm just wondering the second to last line item, which is consultants. How did the contracted fire marshal consultant get paid $11,600 in April for conducting fire inspections during a pandemic when I assume the businesses were closed? So he's an independent contractor, not a town employee. So I'm just trying to understand. And again, there was revenue collected from plan review fire fees, but I was under the impression that he didn't do the plan review fire fees, which actually generate revenue, but instead he did the 1 to 4 year inspections of various businesses in town. So again, I'm just trying to understand the nature of that particular $11,600 expenditure during the month of April.
Mrs. Frankowski?
Nancy, I can't say exactly what period was covered for, because sometimes, like with the other issue, I get bills in arrears, so this could be for a prior month. I'm not sure if Paul still had people working on various things. I'd have to run that, and that's another question I'd have to run by Paul, because I don't know the detail of these bills.
Right, but he's paid on an hourly basis, right? So I would imagine he's paid each month or a couple of times a month?
Yeah.
Or you don't know?
Oh, once a month.
Okay. All right, if you could just get back to me on that would be great. Okay,
yeah.
So those are my two questions for expenditures. I do have two other questions for revenue. Again, on the short revenue book, there's on page 2, where it says volunteer payment from Quinnipiac. It says Quinnipiac College. It's supposed to be Quinnipiac University. I just wanted to point out that the fire department training facility is not included in the current fiscal year budget. So therefore, the $300,000 budgeted volunteer payment from QU that's listed on page 2 of the revenue report cannot be used to pay for this training facility. And a few months ago, Mr. Frieda told Sally Boehme I think it was at a Board of Finance meeting, that anything over the $300,000 from Quinnipiac would go towards the fire training facility. And as of this report, as of April 30th, we have not collected any of the volunteer payments from Quinnipiac. And in his May 14th response to, I believe it was a question from Mary White, Mr. Frieda said that he's hopeful that we'll get this $300,000 volunteer payment this year, but that $250,000 has already been earmarked and approved by Quinnipiac and set aside specifically for this fire department training facility. So I'm just trying to understand, was an extra grant provided, or is there something else, and how is that kind of being financially recorded?
Yes, you're missing several things in this equation, so let me explain.
Okay.
You're missing, number one, that the $300,000 is a portion of the $564,000 that we received from Quinnipiac University. So there's roughly $64,000 set aside that we've already received from QU, allocated towards the fire training facility. The $300,000 voluntary payment on the revenue side has not come in yet. We already have an allocation for $264,000.
So the 264, is that taxes, or is that a separate grant? Or I'm just wondering where in all of this reporting is that recorded, this 264?
We booked $300,000 as revenue.
Yep.
And we put aside $264 for a community project. We've done this every year. Those community projects have included playscapes at all the middle schools, all the elementary schools, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And Quinnipiac University agreed to $264,000 to be set aside for the fire training facility.
So it's kind of treated like a grant. It's not supporting this budget.
No, that's right. Yes.
Right. Got it. Okay. Terrific. Okay. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And then the last thing under revenue, it's the same continuation of the same theme. We received, I believe it was from Ellen a bit ago, some additional inserts to put to replace the last few pages of our budget book, and it basically reflected a shift in the library boiler as well as the public works toters, which were then added to the 5-year capital improvement plan, and they're placed on pages 46 to 49. But again, these two items are not listed anywhere else in the budget. So again, they're not authorized expenditures. So if they're not in the budget, they can't be paid for with MRSA or any other source of revenue that supports this particular budget. So I had asked Ed about this because I remembered that the chairman specifically said, we're going to get that boiler for you, and Ed had thought, well, I think he's going to find some other way, either through Johnson Controls or through another way to pay for it. So I just want to make it abundantly clear that if we're applying for MRSA waivers, that we can't use it for either one of these two things. So if you wanted to comment on that, either Ed or Mike, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, anything that's added to the 5-year plan, this is going to be approved tonight. All we're doing is add it to the 5-year plan. Doesn't mean we're going to do it. But there's a lot of items in the 5-year capital plan, most of which are not going to happen. But they're
right.
there, the reminders.
It's a wish list for sure, and it's definitely not part of this budget. The revenue does not support the capital improvement plan. There are a few items that might cross over, but those things that are in the capital improvement plan just are not supported by the budget.
But if you look in the 5-year capital plan, you'll notice a lot of things will say it's going to be bonded, it's going to be paid for by a grant. So those are never going to be in your budget. They're outside the budget.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
As will be these two items. These items.
Right.
That was a reason for including in the 5-year plan.
Yeah, no, if we get a grant, by all means, or if we wanted to use MRSA funds and go to a town meeting, by all means, we can definitely do that. But our MRSA is a source of revenue that supports the expenditures in the budget, and the capital improvement list is not technically part of our budget. So if we got an outside source of funding through a grant or something like that, absolutely we could use that. But again, I think we wouldn't be able to do it in this.
No, that's not completely true. If there's MRSA money, all the state requires is that it's in the 5-year plan.
Right.
I don't believe that's the case.
It is the case.
Again, MRSA is part of our. If you go to page 6, it is on our revenue sheet, meaning it is a source of revenue that supports the expenditures of our budget. And the items in our capital improvement plan, our 5-year capital improvement plan,
is part of our budget.
It is. If you read the very first line, I know Sally has done this numerous times before the Board of Finance, you will read that it is purely for forecasting purposes. It is not, in fact, for budgetary planning purposes. This is, as Ed said, this is a wish list. It is not something that is supported by our revenue. And MRSA is a source of revenue for the town of North Haven. So I'm just making that abundantly clear so that everyone knows this going forward, and that there's no misunderstandings. And I'll read to you the line. Here it is. The projects contained herein are included for planning purposes, not for the purpose of requesting specific appropriations at the time that the annual operating budget is adopted. Right? That's pretty clear. So MRSA is part of the budget. Capital improvements are not.
Any other questions, Nancy?
Yes. Let's see. So I had one quick question just to kind of check in with Ed. In terms of the MRSA balance, it is currently, again, based on our special funds, the current MRSA balance is around $1,989,000, something like that, and we're expecting $1.4 million in June. And of course, all of that is being recorded as revenue in our revenue reports every month. So I'm just wondering, what portion do you think of that $1.4 million do you think will be remaining? And then, Ed, do you have some sort of prediction as to what the end of year balance will be for MRSA?
Right now, MRSA has $989,000 in it.
Yep.
And I believe $1.8 million was supposed to be coming in this year.
$1.4 million, Ed, and $1.8 million in the next fiscal year.
Exactly.
Yes,
right. Million for this June, and then in this current, in the proposed budget, it's 1.8 for the next fiscal year. So I'm just wondering. It seems like we're on track to maybe be half and half, like half of the 1.4 million will be taken up with at least the things that have been recorded. But obviously you have a much better insight as to what the expectation is for the remainder of the fiscal year. So.
Well, as of right now, we have $801,000 that we could charge against the MRSA. So if you add 2 more months to that, it would be just roughly over $900,000. So that would be use up the balance that's there right now and leave us with the $1.4 million.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So that's very helpful. So use up the balance that we have, but then it would be replenished once the 1.4 comes in. Great. And then the last thing is just with the BOE accounting. Again, Ed, do you have any sense for whether there will be a surplus expected for the BOE budget? I know that they've been skating that very fine line of being, 98% either expended or encumbered for most of the year, but I'm also seeing that many of the Board of Eds for towns around in our surrounding area are reporting surpluses due to reduced transportation and no substitute teachers and supplies and utilities and athletics. So I'm just wondering, do you have any sense, and I know you've speculated about on the TOWD side in terms of a surplus, but do you have a sense for the Board of Ed side for this current fiscal year?
Yeah, I haven't met with Pam in a while since all this started, but
Sure.
I would imagine that they've gotten it down quite a bit, so
Right.
that they ought to be in pretty good shape, based on a lot of the items that you were just mentioning.
Right.
So let me comment on that, Ed.
Great.
Yep.
So this is something I'm directly involved with. We've gone from a possible special request from the Board of Finance for a special allocation to subsidize losses as a result of special ed to what's going to end up to be, it looks like a slight surplus.
So do you have a sense for during his March 14th presentation, Superintendent Stirk certainly mentioned all of the things that were savings and also mentioned a few things that were unexpected expenses associated with the pandemic, but he never really put numbers to it. So I'm just wondering, do you have some sense of the net of it?
No, we don't.
Okay.
So let me say one more thing, coming back to MRSA.
Sure.
And I'm saying this as someone who deals with OPM.
Mm-hmm.
We can go to OPM at any time, and we can ask for an expenditure approval for MRSA. We would never use or request a waiver for a library boiler. We have the opportunity to place requests for MRSA expenditures, even if they're in the the first year of the 5-year capital plan. So I want to clarify that.
Thank you, Mr. Frieda. If no other questions, I'd like to make a motion to accept the reports as presented. Can I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. I'll call the roll call, which I should keep closer to me. Mr. Frieda? Yes?
Yay.
Mr. Hallahan?
Aye.
Mr. Donahue?
Approve.
Ms. DeSecchio?
Approve.
Mr. Leonis?
Accept.
Ms. Barrett?
Approve.
And I approve. Next item. Stacy, can you make your presentation on the tax collector suspense list? We know you're by the pool. Stacy? We lost Stacy. You all have in your packet our suspense list. There's 597 accounts, a total amount of $227,910.91. These are items that are suspended beyond a certain statutory date. It does not mean that the town cannot collect it, but they no longer track it as a viable receivable. Is there some of it's automotive, some of it's personal property, some businesses that are out of business. I don't think we really have properties on this because there's an asset that a town could go after. Anyone have any questions? Hearing none, I'd like to call the roll again to accept the suspense list as presented. Mr. Frieda?
Yay.
Mr. Hallahan?
Yes.
Donahue?
Approve.
Ms. Fisecchio?
Approve.
Mr. Leonis?
Approve.
Ms. Barrett?
Approve.
And I approve. Next item, appointment of our auditors. We are in a five-year contract? We are in a contract, I believe, until 2022 with PKF O'Connor Davis. They were awarded the bid in 2018. I make a motion to appoint them as the town auditor for fiscal year beginning 6/30/20. Can I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? I assume not, since we are in a contract. Done. I will call the roll. Mr. Frieda?
Yay.
Mr. Hallahan?
Aye.
Mr. Donahue?
Approve.
Ms. Fisecchio?
Approve.
Mr. Leonis?
Approve.
Ms. Barrett?
Approve.
And I approve as well. Next item on our agenda, major item on our agenda, is our fiscal year budget for 2020-2021. Before we begin, I'd like to just say the fiscal year 2021 budget, I think we all will agree, is quite unique. But I'd like to assure the residents that the development of the budget did not change. The Board of Selectmen sent us a budget in the same time and format as they had been doing since before any of us were on the board. The Finance conducted the same workshops in each department and Board of Ed, with each department and Board of Ed, as it has always done. The majority members, Mr. Donahue, Ms. Fisecchio, Mr. Leonis, and myself, has caucused several times to review and refine the budget sent to us by the Board of Selectmen, as we have done every year since being on the board. These meetings resulted in a change in front of you in this proposed budget. They represent a reduction of $1,805,538. I would like to thank them for all their hard work. This group of people brought a set of talent to the table. And each one of us, I think, has a strong suit or strong background in different areas, and that combined strength served the rest of the town very well. They're exceptional individuals in their fields, and the town is well served by them. The budget does reflect a 5.1% increase in expenditures. Roughly 19% of that is increase in debt service. paying off the middle school and the firehouse and the police station. And actually, I think we're still making some payments on the high school. We did add public safety, firemen, and as always, health costs is always an increase. I'd like to acknowledge the economic growth the First Selectman has brought to North Haven. Finalizing this budget during our caucuses, we actually realized and came to the assessment that the growth that the town has had in the grand list took care of the growth in expenditures in this budget. While some people's taxes may go up or down based on reval, the expenses themselves that this budget generated was more than covered in the top-line revenue growth that the First Selectman has obtained. Having said that, I ask Mr. Frieda to make a few comments before we begin our discussion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll only be 2 minutes here. You all watched the budget presentation last week. The background of this budget really starts in my first couple of years here in office in North Haven. In those years, I was really faced with some really huge challenges here. And I'm not going to get into what those challenges were, because that's really the past. But all along, during the 10-plus years that I've been North Haven's first selectman, I have said that my goal is to grow the top-line revenue large enough to offset the needs in terms of expenditures that the town requires, including improving capital. And if we look back, we've built firehouses, a police station. We've paved 80 to 90 miles worth of roadways, perhaps even more. We built a new middle school. We mentioned the police department. So the goal finally has been achieved. If we look at the last 4 years here, with the grand list growth that started to increase, in the last 4 years, we've had 2 of the 4 years with a 0% mill rate increase. And this year, the third year of the last 4 years, we're offering a mill rate decrease of 0.33. Mr. Monaco mentioned 19% of this budget is debt. When we look at debt plus health insurance plus the pension increase of $123,000, about 45% of this budget is in those 3 areas. Very important areas. Debt, paying for the buildings and the facilities that we've built and upgraded. I'm not even mentioning capital, because if I added that in, you would see even more of a percentage. So 45% of this increase is debt, health insurance, and pension. This budget is a budget that not only satisfies all of the needs of the town, but it enhances public safety greatly. It upgrades critically a 911 dispatch system that had flaws in it. It fully supports education at a time when special ed costs we projected this past year to increase. We've been out of school, but special ed costs are continuing to rising across the state, in particular with well-run municipalities and desirable municipalities like North Haven and many other municipalities. And this budget also upgrades technology and still offers the residents a 0.33 mill rate a decrease. So that's the summarization, an executive overview, if you will.
Thank you. It appears a few of us got knocked off, because I was knocked off for part of that, Michael.
Yeah,
okay.
I was as well.
All right.
But having said that, I think most of us, who was the other person that was knocked off?
Nancy.
Nancy.
How long?
I was too, Rich, but I'm back on.
All 3 of us got knocked off for, I would say, a minute.
I was too, Diane, but I got back in.
I'll be more than happy to take another minute to just do a summarization of what I summarized.
If you like, please.
Okay. So forgive me if you heard some of this. All along, right from the beginning, I was faced with significant challenges my first few years in office, and I won't get into those challenges. But all along I said my goal was to increase the top-line revenue to pay for and satisfy the needs of the government, including upgrading critical infrastructure. In the last 4 years, we've started to see the grand list grow. We've seen in the last 4 years, including this coming fiscal year now, 0% increases in the mill rate, and now a 0.3% decrease. 45% of this budget is debt, health insurance, and pension. At a time when many municipalities are overstating revenues, like pandemic expenses revenues in the next fiscal year, and at a time when municipalities are raising mill rates up to 2 mills, and in some municipalities about 2.4 mills, we're offering our residents a decrease in the mill rate and enhancing services including public safety, enhancing 911 dispatch, which really critically needed that, fully supporting education next year at a time when special ed costs are rising, and upgrading technology.
Thank you, Mr. Freedom. Mr. Hallahan.
Yes.
Comments, questions, suggestions for this budget?
Yeah, I just wanted to state my overall position first, since we may be going around 2 rounds here in discussion. I did want to acknowledge the great accomplishments of the First Selectman and others in increasing the grand list. This is something we've been looking forward to, and in terms of its gravity and its breadth. And it's good to be able to work with this as a solid foundation for years to come. However, despite the changes that were made in our budget here on approximately March 18th, that Mr. Monaco and others worked on, which resulted in a reduction of $1.8 million. Still, at this moment, the overall spending increase in the budget, which is $5.3 million or 5.1%, that is, I find that to be unacceptable. We know the major drivers which contributed to this increase. The debt service has gone up by 13%, which of course was approved by the public through referendum and other ways in previous moments. The health insurance has shows an increase in our budget of 6.5%. The fire department, which has undergone a number of changes, some which we concur with and others that we sometimes question, that has increased in this budget by over 10%. And of course the education department, which is over half of our spending in any given year, has gone up, or will go up 5% in this budget, which is $2.7 million. So, we know that the current COVID crisis in our budget-making process, it exists, but in our budget-making process, it's a double-edged sword, where on the plus side, there are savings related to the shutdown of town buildings and the reduction of some functions, but on the negative side, or on the side that affects people, the way it affects the citizens of North Haven, who are under greater stress. Their incomes are affected. It may be an increased need for social services or economic assistance, and businesses are incredibly negatively impacted by reduced income. So if we can, we must react in some way by doing all we can to ease the burden of taxation. When the town and education sides of our budget both increase by over 5% in a given fiscal year, and that's what's being proposed right now, I feel like we have failed to do our number one job. I mean, we're the guardians of the finances, and any amount of additional taxable property in terms of a higher grand list should not allow us to overlook our responsibility of limiting expenditures. Well, those right now are my overall thoughts. I am not in support of the budget in its current form, but of course this meeting is not over yet. So in the next round of participation, I will make some suggested reductions that might make the budget a little bit more palatable. That's all at this time.
Well, Michael, you do have another minute left. If you'd like to give some ideas so people can start thinking about what your proposed changes might be, or would you rather wait?
I think that we could just go around with some general thoughts at first, but I would just say that I'm looking at both sides of this budget, and I'm looking at it as though a good share of the taxpayers, as excited as they are about having no tax increase, will want to know why the reduction could not be larger and whether we did all we could to limit spending.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Donahue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to make a couple of brief comments. Some of them Mike actually covered in his overview. When I looked at the budget, and some of this was mentioned as well in Mike's presentation a week or two ago, but we all know the debt service here is increasing about $1 million, and Mike mentioned some of the projects and the reason why. The Board of Ed Medical is going up almost another $1 million. It wasn't mentioned yet, but another big item, which we've talked about at our budget meetings several times, and is always a wild card, is special ed. That's $641,000. And, we have 2 firemen in the budget, which just the salary alone is $144,000 plus whatever the benefits. So those 4 items, Mike mentioned 1 or 2 other things, really represent increase. A big chunk of the rest we all know is contractual wage increases. I guess my other comment is Nancy Barrett was good enough to send around an Excel spreadsheet with all the members received.
Oh, you did get that. Great. Excellent. I didn't know that you received it.
I looked at it pretty hard, actually, and I'm sure Nancy will take us through it maybe later on when she has her comments. But, Mike just sort of said it, but when you look at what's happened over the last 10 or so years, if you look at the fiscal years from fiscal 2011 to 2016, the grand list on average in those years went down 0.7%. The average increase in the budget then was 1.5%. So we had, a very low. We had negative grand list increases, and the budget increases were pretty modest. We then had 3 years where we had positive grand list growth, but it was 0.72%, and the the budget increase in those 3 years was 2.4%, 2.54, and that's an average, by the way. And then we all know we've had fantastic grand list growth the last 2 years, $77 million in 20, $228 million last year. That's 5.34% again, an average of both years. And we've had budget increases last year, and as proposed, at least at this point, it's 5%. So my conclusion is that during those years, and most of those were Mike's, but the last year was Jan McCarthy's year. I think the town, the Board of Finance, has done a good job of matching the budget increases with the grand list decreases, then some modest increases, and now some very strong increases the last 2 years. And we all know it's taken a lot of planning on behalf of Mike and the town and the rest of our economic development team to do this. 5% does appear to be a big number. I mean, and Mike just said that. But some of these items we really, don't really have the ability to change. Our goal over the years, not just this year, has usually been to preserve the services for the town and try and keep the budget increases to a modest amount. It does seem larger this year. I think there's some legitimate reasons for it. So I guess what I would say is on the expense side, maybe Mike will have some suggestions when we go around to him again. I would say there's probably some concern by me and maybe the board members on the revenue side. I don't think that was the case back in March when we put this together. But if anything, given the current crisis, my concerns would probably err more on the side of the revenue than the expenses. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Tim. I will just expand some of the numbers that you were getting that might make things a little bit clearer for the Board of Ed side. On the Board of Ed, which is roughly a 5% increase in their expenditures, roughly 1.6% of that is medical and 1.2% of that is special ed. So of their 5%, 2.8% are just those two items alone. You take them off the table, and it's a modest 2.2% increase. Moving on, Ms. Visecchio, I know we all work together on the budgets, but do you have any other input you'd like to add?
Yes, I mean, I agree. Obviously, we all worked on this, and we had lively discussions on it. And I do agree that it is high. However, the grand list growth has definitely helped. In the past, when we've looked at trying to cut services, the town didn't like it. Once we did it, they were calling Mr. Frieda's office asking for, leaf pickup back. The challenge is, again, we all know the Board of Ed, right? Most of 3/4 of that budget is contractual. Special ed is a huge part of the expense. Not sure what we can do about that. I mean, it is a concern. I think it's always a concern, and we always talk about it every year, that there's not a lot that we can do with that when it's contractual. I also echo what Tim said about the revenue expenses, and I, for one, kept asking about the paramedic services in this budget, that it was budgeted $170,000, and I kept asking about that number, and we did not achieve that number, and it was lowered in this budget. So I agree with the unknowns of what's going on in today's world right now. There is a little bit of concern, but again, this was put together before a lot of this happened, and I think there's a lot of unknown as to what is going to happen in the future. It changes on a daily basis. So I agree it's a challenge, but we worked very hard to put it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Mr. Leonis, any input for us?
Well, I guess I'm just going to, I can't add too much more than what's already been said. We did work diligently on this budget. I think we're satisfying all the demands for services in the upcoming year, and I think it's well worth approving. I'm going to parrot everything that was said by Tim and Di. I mean, I fully. I don't know what else I could add. So
no,
I want it to prove to be passed.
Thank you, Jim. Ms. Barrett, your input?
Yes. So I have some comments that I'd like to make, and then in the next cycle I'll make my actual recommendations. But I'm glad to hear that you all received at least the first round of the spreadsheet that I created, because I think that having that historical data is very important. And I've really put a lot of time and effort into doing comprehensive research in preparation for this meeting, and I think that tonight we, the duly elected members of the Board of Finance, for the very first time, and because of both the pandemic and the governor's executive orders, have the awesome responsibility of adopting the town budget for the upcoming 2021 fiscal year. Our customary responsibility is to merely recommend the budget for our citizens to adopt or reject at a referendum, but tonight the taxpayers of North Haven are counting on us to provide the best services at the lowest possible cost. So for the people who are listening at home, I think that it's very important to have a little bit of historical perspective on the budget for the town of North Haven. And in order to fully appreciate the magnitude of this proposed North Haven town budget, it should be considered contextually, given North Haven's historical data, the current unprecedented pandemic conditions, as well as the forecastable future. Again, if you look back at the last decade and you just focus on three metrics, the grand list, the total budget, and the mill rate, there are some pretty obvious trends. During that 11-year period, the grand list basically didn't change. There was one drop in 15-16 and a slight bump of 2.8% last year, but for the most part it was very flat. During that same period, the total budget increased each year $1 to $2 million, or 1 to 3%. There was a slight decrease in 9/10, and again a big jump last year. But for the most part, it was a pretty steady increase. And our mill rate was all over the place, as Mike mentioned. In some years, it's been 0, and it's been as high as 11.5% increase. The point is, during this period of flat economic development, the budget was steadily increasing from $81 million up to $103 million. And some of the mill rate increases were substantial. So during that period, the taxpayers of North Haven were really doing the financial heavy lifting. The average percent increase in town government budget from 2010 to 20 was about 2.76%. And on the BOE side, the average increase was about 2.3%. So with that context, what is different about this proposed 2021 budget? Well, this $109 million town budget, as others have mentioned, reflects a $5.3 million increase in expenditures. And if you add the current fiscal year increase of $4.9 million to the proposed $5.3 million increase for next fiscal year, that's a combined total of $10.2 million in increased expenditures in a 2-year period. That is not sustainable. So I think of this proposed budget as the fiscal year of fives in terms of percent increases. The town government increase of 5.3, BOE 5.0, capital 5.5, and the total increase of 5.1. And again, you have to contrast that with the historic increases of 1 to 3% of a much smaller base. While it is absolutely true that the mill rate was decreased in this budget by a mere 1.1%, or 0.3 of a mil, I think that it's also important to keep that in the context of some of the other factors that influence finances. So you would have to ask, how can we afford such a substantial spike in spending and a mill rate reduction all in the same year? And there's only one answer, and the answer is the estimated grand list increased by 7.9%. Again, this is primarily due to Amazon and the increase in the taxable business personal property assessed value. So I also have to commend Mr. Frieda for bringing this to fruition. We also just had a revaluation year for all real property. That's residential, commercial, and industrial. And Mr. Frieda estimated that 38% of North Haven homeowners will still see an increase in their taxes despite the 1.1% mill rate decrease. And again, because of the grand list increase and increases in property taxes, we are seeing on page 6, the current property taxes jumped by $6 million.
Ms. Barrett, you've exceeded the time. Do you need another minute to square it up, or are you good?
I just need 1 minute to quickly talk about Board of Ed, which, again, as everyone mentioned, is the proposed budget is a $2.7 million increase, or 5%, and that is more than double the average annual increase during the past decade. And there are no new positions. There's savings due to positions being cut and retirements, and the average BOE budget percent increase among at least 10 towns in the district reference group, excluding North Haven, is 2.56%. So that is a stark contrast to 5% that we're asking for our current Board of Ed budget. So
thank you, Ms. Barrett. Mr. Frieda, do you have any comments for our second go-around?
In listening to all of the feedback, I will stand by the fact that the goals have been accomplished in terms of growing the top-line revenue to pay for much-needed improvements. And this isn't a government that is spending frivolously. This is a government that spent, once again, to build a new middle school, largely supported by our citizens, to build a new police department that was in disrepair and decay, like the middle school was. We've kept up with paving 10 miles of roadways a year. That right there, when you look at $2 million a mile, $2 million a year for the last 9 to 10 years, that's almost $20 million right there. So we are improving the town. We could have gone the other way and not spent anything and let the buildings decay. But what type of legacy does that leave for future generations? What type of legacy does that leave for young families who move here because they like the service model and they like the school system and they like the fact that the buildings are new? It would leave a poor legacy. And as I've said before, and I said it last week on TV, that I am also building for the future here. And for the future, the debt service will subside significantly. But we have an obligation to our citizens who live here to do everything we can to improve this great town. And that's what we've done. So we can look at the numbers. When I first took office, 5 major businesses had left. Significant decline in grand list revenue. And one of those businesses, at 297 State Street, I inherited a situation where $367,000 was not collected by the previous administration because the declaration wasn't filed to put the town first in terms of getting taxes. So we really were faced with significant challenges there. And in my first full year, there was a grand list. There was a reval. And property values sunk dramatically as a result of what happened in the few years before I got here. Those are some of the challenges we were faced with, some of the many challenges. So everything we do here is designed to not only maintain services, but also enhance the service model and improve the town's infrastructure. And as I said last week, and this goes back to Tim's point, if the revenue drops next year because we don't get state funding or whatever happens, even though we're being committed to put those numbers in, I am fully prepared to make difficult decisions here. And there will be hard decisions that will be made if that happens.
Thank you, Mr. Frieda. Mr. Hallahan.
Yes, Mr. Frieda, of course, once again gets incredible credit for the great services that our town has, and the way that economic growth has contributed to our position today. So, but notwithstanding, we just have to face our task here year to year, budget to budget. And for this upcoming fiscal year's budget to be more acceptable to more people and to allow more businesses and taxpayers to see some sort of a savings instead of just a flattened tax increase. The town, both the town and the Board of Ed sides of the budget should both see some sort of a meaningful reduction still to get from where we are around 5 to 5.5% down to a 4.5% increase threshold. So the goal that I see it is to at least get down to 4.5%, which would still be a very atypical increase for the town of North Haven. And to do that, $400,000 would have to come off the town side of the budget, and the Board of Ed would have to be reduced by approximately $300,000. So I would like to make a motion to work off of the draft that was produced by Mr. Monaco and the other members of the board, and to further reduce the Board of Education by $300,000, and on the town side, the town lines to reduce the town side by $400,000 on the following line items: $75,000 to the contractual replacement staffing of the fire department, which currently is tracking very low and reasonably. $75,000 to the contracted fire marshal consultant. These are all reductions, and $100,000 off of the medical insurance line, and $150,000 off the debt service line. All of those reductions will not have any effect on the services provided to the town, and they would all be much more closer to the actual achievable expenditures on those lines. So that is my proposal at this time. I ask for a second.
Is there a second?
I'll second for the purpose of discussion.
Just for discussion, yes.
There's been a motion and a second. Mr. Frieda, yea or nay?
Well, I thought we would discuss it first.
Yeah.
So in the discussion, I'll start with a question. Mr. Hallahan, when you mentioned debt service, are you suggesting taking more out of the debt service reserves that we have?
Yes, I am. Yes, correct.
All right. So we have, just for everyone who may have missed me saying this last week on TV, Ed and I still have about $364,000 roughly. That's the rough number available.
Yes, that was my understanding.
Yes. So in the spirit of cooperation on that, this is just my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, I'd be willing to take more money out of that to bring that debt service amount down. So we have $364,000 to work with. I'd be willing to take a portion of that out there and put it against that. I would even be willing to take the consultant line down from 100 and I think it's 150 to 100,000.
Yep.
But I'm going to hold the line on two things, because I trust Chief Paul Januszewski very much. And this is a data-driven individual who does his homework. That $852,000 there that you see in that line item reflects an intense amount of analysis that he did. He went through the vacation days, the sick days. He calculated what the salary increases have been this year and last year, which reflect an increase in this number. And I'm not going to agree to do that, because I know that it's going to be overspent if we do it. That's the realistic number. The good news on this is, down the road, in the next few years, when some of the longstanding firefighters retire, and they're going to be replaced with new firefighters, those firefighters who come in are not going to have the same days in terms of sick time, as an example, that the ones who retired had. Because as contractual negotiations conclude, that's one of the bargaining things that the union has agreed to, eliminate those days. So that's going to get better down the road. But for this fiscal year, we definitely need to do that. And I'm totally against adversely affecting the Board of Ed. You know, we, as you heard Patrick last week, we've really risen up in terms of our DIRG, in terms of where we are. Our per pupil spending is less than some of the other municipalities in the cities and towns and districts. And I'm very concerned, and there's nobody on this call who knows better than I do what's going on the state level with special education. North Haven is a highly desirable community. We have people that want to come into North Haven because of the school system, because of the services, and because of the business community. But more importantly, or equally important to that, is the fact that we know that there could potentially be people coming into district in the mid-fiscal year who already want to come here. And those are going to be special ed costs that if we take $300,000 out of this budget, we could very well come back to the Board of Finance next year with a special allocation. So that's why I'm against that. I'm willing to give in a little bit here, but not on those two issues.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could be heard, because I think I'm next on the rota.
Yes, Mr. Donahue.
So people at home can follow, because I know it's a more difficult format. Mike mentioned 3 items. Mr. Frieda just addressed 3 of them. So the only one I'm going to ask about, and I'll need Mr. Hallahan's participation. Those of you may know Mike and I are both on the insurance subcommittee is probably the wrong word, but the insurance committee. So, Mike, just take me through your logic on the $100,000, please, for the town side on the medical insurance.
Yes, well, it's true that even more can come off than that, but our agents, Brown & Brown, have recommended a budgeting, they've recommended a net cost to the town in the upcoming budget of $5,659,000. That's 5,659. And right now we're higher than that. Now, in the same report, though, they did state that it was important for us to start to set aside some money for both claims that are incurred but not yet charged, and a reserve fund for the
rainy day.
It was a rainy day fund or
for
something.
the rainy day, yes, in case for a situation when costs increase above budgeted allocations. So I understand those needs, and for that reason, the total increase in that line item, above and beyond what the expense would be, I have it right now. It's in the budget at $6,236,000. So right now we are about $600,000 above what their recommended or what their projected cost will be to the town on that line. So I'm just taking 100, and I'm now going to ask if it can be 200,000. 200,000. We can decide this when the motion is voted upon. But since other items in my request have been are not being concurred with, we do have some room to move on this medical line while still putting some money aside for those reserve purposes.
All right. If I could just follow up with one question, Mr. Swinkowski, Mr. Chairman. Ed, the numbers that Mike is quoting assume that ACES joined the cooperative. Do you happen to know, did they join our cooperative?
ACES is they started the cooperative.
So I'm sorry, it was post ACES. It was post an RFP. So the numbers that Mike's quoting, which was the $5,660,000, that is the correct number, right?
That's from the report they gave us. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I did dig with the report while Mike was talking, and I see the incurred but not reported claims figure and the recommendation for the rainy day fund. I would say this: if you add the raw cost of the medical, if you will, if you add in the recommendation for the incurred but not reported, those two items do come in less than the $6,236,000 in the budget. However, the rainy day fund, which I believe is there to protect the town against spikes which are naturally occur in an expense item like this, the recommendation there was a range. I'll just give you the lower end of the range, which was $690,000. So, frankly, if you added all three of those together, it'd be above the 6.2, but I know there's some conversation about what the right figure is for the rainy day fund. So without committing to a number, Mike, I guess my position, then I'll let someone else speak, is that I'd support some decrease in this item. I don't know that I would go 200, though. With that said, I'll yield to the next member.
I have one question, Diane, before you go. Tim, 5.6, what's the number for the IBR?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, the IBR was $352,000 rounded. There's some change there, but rounded.
So that brings the number to roughly $6 million.
$6,012,000.
All right. So right now, Mr. Swinkowski has about $200,000 above that, which I assume is what he was looking to fund towards the rainy day fund, and yet they also suggested that we put $600,000 towards the rainy day fund.
688 is the low end of the range. The high end of the range was $1,147,000.
Okay, just wanted to make those points clear.
Yep, thank you.
Ms. Fisecchio, you're welcome for any input.
I agree with what Tim said about the insurance. I don't know that I would go the $200,000. And I also agree with Mr. Frieda's suggestions as well.
Thank you, Diane. Ms. Barrett?
So am I just commenting on Mr. Hallahan's presentation?
No, it's your... Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Never mind.
Never mind, Ms. Barrett. Mr. Leonis.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. No, I concur. But are we just speaking about the medical side now, or are we speaking about everything?
Well, no, you're speaking about any input you have to the budget. You can comment on Michael's suggestions, or you don't comment on Michael's suggestions. Make your own.
Well,
if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, technically we are commenting on Mike's.
I'm sorry, I stand corrected. There was a motion made, and it was second, so we were talking about Michael's suggestions.
Michael
Hallahan.
Okay. It was brought up that there was $364,000 in debt, and Mike Hallahan wants to take off $150,000, all of it. And now that was my question. Are we looking at dropping it $150,000, or a portion of that?
Of the medical?
No.
Debt service, $150,000.
Debt service.
Debt service, yes. We would pull another $150,000 from the debt reserve fund, which would lower the exposure on debt. So it would take $150,000 off expenses.
Well, I don't know. I kind of like the budget where it was, but to concur with First Selectman and Tim, if we have an opportunity to lower some of it, we should take advantage of it.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
That's it.
Ms. Barrett? Hallahan's motion.
Yes, to his point about the consultant to the fire department, I do. This is the contracted fire marshal consultant. If you look at the past 4 years, he was paid $62,000, $89,000, $96,000, and currently is tracking at about $76,000. There's only 1 month left in the year, so I completely agree that taking $50,000 off of that $150,000 is appropriate. I have to defer to those who have expertise with insurance about the $100,000 reduction. As much as I have been a lifelong advocate for education, I have to also concur that I believe that a $300,000 BOE reduction also makes sense. Because again, even with that reduction, we're still talking about giving the Board of Education an increase to their budget of $2.4 million, or a 4.46% increase. And during most of the budget seasons I've been aware of, the Board of Finance has cut the requested Board of Ed budget, except for last year, in which we gave them every last penny that they asked for, of 2.9%. And it seemed to me from the May 14th presentation that Mr. Stirk seemed to believe that they could absorb the initial $200,000 cut to the Board of Ed budget very easily. And I think it's possible that the same could be done with an additional $300,000. So that's my feeling about that.
Thank you. Michael, my comments to your suggestions.
Yes.
I also don't have a problem really moving $150,000 from the debt reserve. I wouldn't mind holding it for one more year, but if it's something that you feel strongly about, I would consider it. The $50,000 on the consultant, I have no problem with that one whatsoever. The medical, I really see Ed putting $200,000 aside based on the numbers Tim just rattled off for his rainy day fund. Again, it's a compromise. I might offer to split that and only put $100,000 towards the rainy day fund and reduce the budget by $100,000. The fire department is an up in the air kind of thing. I'm not comfortable with that. Board of Ed, I'm actually not comfortable with moving anything on Board of Ed right now, only because when I do look at their budget, and as I said, we were talking, Nancy was just mentioning $2 million.
2.4.
2.4 million. 1.5 million of that is medical and special ed.
No. So the 2.4 million would be what would be left after we took off 300,000.
Right.
So we're currently at 2.7 million.
The 2.7 million.
Right. 2.7 million.
The 1.5 million of that, or close to half of that, is just those two line items. So I'm not interested, I think, in moving anything with the Board of Ed.
Right. And remember, they're also getting the $213,000 from the CARES Act. So I'm sorry to encroach on your
Please.
time, but I just
having said that, I'd like to, Mr. Hallian, if we have a motion, it's been seconded, we had discussion.
No, I could amend my motion if you wish.
Well, I'd like to see if, I know the majority members are the ones that put this budget together, so they're pretty comfortable with what's here. Nancy, I'd like to give you 5 minutes if you had something in there that you specifically, a line item that you thought needed to change. I know you concurred with what Michael said. Was there anything else you had in mind?
Oh, I have a whole proposal, so I'm not quite sure how we're handling this. Are we just commenting on what Mr. Hallahan is presenting, or am I supposed to add my thoughts in terms of additional cuts or different kinds of cuts?
I think we should vote on Mr. Hallahan.
All right, well, let's vote on Mr. Hallahan's
okay.
Motion to...
Well, I'd like to try to make a motion that might be agreeable.
Could you re-articulate your motion?
Well, first I just want to ask you and the First Selectman's opinion on whether we can actually, on the town side, get to a $400,000 reduction. So I want to know whether the debt service change can go can be up to 200,000, and whether the medical insurance line can be reduced by 150,000.
If you'd like,
I can give you my feelings too, but
okay. Rich, why don't you go first, and I'll.
I'm not comfortable with the 400. I can see us on your suggestions coming up with 300,000.
Yeah.
I really don't see the 4. I think it's just making us too thin in medical. Yeah. And that's kind of where I stand. And I'm not. I don't see anything in the Board of Ed.
All right. So let me comment also. Thank you. So, Michael, to answer your question, I'm fine with the 150 out of debt reserves. I'm even willing to go higher on that, because that's the taxpayers' money right there that Ed and I were able to accumulate as a result of running a pristine financial government here and creating bond premiums for monies that we borrowed. So I'm willing to go into that even further. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the consultant. We can manage that. I'm even willing to, because I'm not on board with any reductions on the Board of Ed, including the medical, because I know something that many people here may not know. There are, and I got to be careful in terms of how I present this, but there are a lot of higher claims on the Board of Ed side for a variety of serious reasons. On the town side, I think Ed and I can maybe manage a $100,000 reduction. So I'm fine with even going to 200, Michael, on the debt.
On the debt, can you go to 250?
Yes, because there's 364,000 to work with. It wasn't my original intention, because next year I wanted to have enough money also to reduce that debt before I can get to the point where the debt will drop off significantly.
Right. Well, here's the thing. If you go to 250 on that, 100 on the medical, and of course 50 on that fire consultant, then you will have a yes vote from myself on the town side of this budget, because that will get us below 4.5%, and that'll reach the goal that I think we should all have in presenting this to the public as a finished piece of work.
In the spirit of cooperation, I can work with that suggestion and I can agree to it. Ed, I know you're still there. You and I have to manage this every day. I'm okay with the 100,000 on the medical, because I know on the town side, the seriousness of the long-term claims are less than what we may see on the board side. I'm good, Ed, with the $50,000 on the consultant, and I'm good with the $100,000. I mean the $250,000 on debt reserves. Ed, we think we can manage that.
Yeah, the debt I could see because we have the funds available, and we'll just have to be very careful with the insurance fund.
Right.
Because
Yep.
I had said to Mike earlier that me and Pam at one time had sat down and gone over their numbers with us, and we still had issues, but then COVID hit, and we never got to finish with them.
Right.
Because we couldn't reconcile everything to them.
So I can agree to this, Michael, and the rest of the board members listening in as part of this discussion, I can agree to that, but I will not agree to anything else.
Yeah.
Can I be heard one more time on this, Mr. Chairman? Richard?
Go ahead,
Rich.
Tim. We might have lost
Go ahead,
Rich.
Tim.
Go ahead, Tim.
I want to make sure Rich is on the phone still. Rich, are you still on the phone?
I'm still there. I'll yield you my time.
Okay, sorry. No, I don't need to yield.
I'll yield you a portion of my time.
I just wanted to say, I heard Mike say a moment ago he was considering amending his motion. I just want to say I don't think we should do that, and here's why. We have other members who haven't spoken yet, and Nancy just indicated she has her own proposal, and I don't think we should change this this recommendation until we hear from the other members. If we vote on this and approve it, what does it? We haven't given our other members a chance to say what they want. So I mean, I hear some consensus. Don't get me wrong, Mike, but I'm just fearful that if we vote on this because some members agree to these cuts, we haven't heard from, frankly, myself. We haven't heard from the other members yet.
Right.
I agree. That's why I initially didn't want to have it as a motion. So in reality, the only way I think to move forward at this point would be to vote on the motion. We can vote it down.
No, I'll withdraw the motion and I'll make it again later on. So I'll withdraw the motion.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Put a pin in it.
Yeah.
Right, so we've had discussion on Mr. Hallahan's suggestions. Mr. Donahue, did you have any other suggestions for this budget?
Not at this time.
Ms. Visecchio, do you have any other suggestions?
No, not at this time.
Mr. Leonis?
No, not at this.
Ms. Barrett, you have other suggestions?
Yes, I do. But I have a quick question first. Again, since we only have $364,000 in the debt service fund, Mike, Frida, and Ed, are there any chances of selling any additional bond premiums in order to supplement that anytime in the near future, or is that it?
No, there is a chance, yes.
Oh, there is. Okay,
Yes.
good. Because I just had some concerns about depleting that in this year, and then we'd be facing a big gulp next year.
Right.
So, okay. So having said that, I actually have a proposal for reducing the expenditures in the proposed 2021 budget by $800,500 for a total budget of $108,290,654, and that's a 4.3% increase over the current fiscal year, and it further reduces the mill rate to 30.59 for a total reduction of 0.59 mils or 1.9%. And again, this mill rate could go even lower if my suggestions for increased revenue are also approved.
Nancy, can I suggest you move to the line item since your time is running?
Yes. So I would like to recommend capital reductions in two different forms. One, I'd like to utilize the same mechanism we used 2 years ago to earmark items to be funded by MRSA, so they're removed from our capital budget. Animal shelter roof for $25,000, fire station generator for $45,000, fire police dispatch for $110,000, and the field line marker for $40,500. Again, this last item I would actually be okay with eliminating as well. And then two line items to cut or modify. One is the police cruisers. In the past 4 years, we have funded 2 rather than 3 cruisers, except for the current year. So I'm proposing that we alternate 3 this year, 2 the next year. So let's cut 1 police cruiser and cut $20,000 from the fire department station security. So that's a total of $280,000 in capital reductions. As I mentioned, the $300,000 in BOE. And then on the town side, I have about $220,000 in cost reductions. One is that contracted fire marshal reduction of $50,000. Another is cutting contract obligations line in the personnel policy expenses section. This is a bit of a catch-all funding bucket that's currently only tracking at 11%, and I thought, rather than increasing it 73%, we might be able to cut $50,000. And I understand that this pays for retroactive pay when we have CBA renegotiations, but it's just a suggestion. And then I have about a dozen, 10,000 here, 5,000 there type suggestions. And then the last thing is, I think we could decrease the mill rate safely by increasing our funding, either increase the unrestricted fund balance from $1 million to $1.2 million. Last year it was $1.125, and so that's a $200,000 change. Or increase the appropriated fund balance transfer to the general fund debt reserves from $725 to $1 million. Again, last year it was $1.4 million. And my question is, can either or both of these be done and still maintain our healthy 8% balance for AAA rating? And these two levers have much more predictable impact on the budget, and it's unclear whether the presumed 98.5% tax collection rate will be accurate estimate given the financial effects of the pandemic. And that's my suggestions.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That was just a mouthful. I have a very hard time understanding what was. There was just so much data there.
Yeah, it's a lot. But again, if I'm
hard to take
limited
notes,
to 5 minutes,
and it just I just couldn't keep up with you.
So if you go to page 6 of the budget and you take a look at the fund transfer, we have it broken up into 2 categories. There's the unrestricted fund balance, and then there's the appropriated fund balance transfer to the general fund debt reserves. So I'm just suggesting increasing one or both of those, and we would have more revenue. If you have more revenue and the same expenditures, the mill rate goes down. Conversely, the same revenues, but you decrease your expenditures. Again, the mill rate goes down.
I'm not anywhere near in favor of increasing unrestricted fund balance. That is maintaining it. That does go to our AAA rating. As far as some of the capital items you were talking about, police cruisers, there's a reason every now and then we'll cut them a unit, but they're continually changing. So it's hard to just...
I'm saying still fund 2 of them, just not 3.
Well,
I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
In the
current budget, they're asking...
What was the other capital items you said you wanted to cut?
So I'm talking about earmarking 4 items to be paid for with a MRSA waiver.
Well,
so that's animal shelter roof, fire station generator, fire and police dispatch,
and
seal line marker.
The roof would not qualify for MRSA.
Well, again...
The generator may or may not, probably not.
So if they paid $200,000, or they gave us a waiver for a $200,000 remediation of the police firing range in the basement of the old police station.
Well, the state's in a lot different shape than it was at that point.
Low. And perhaps
What was the other items in capital?
And then in capital, in terms of cutting, one was the police cruiser, and the other was $20,000 to the fire department station security. So. Again, I wasn't sure if that was essential, but it's combined $60,000 for those 2. So the earmarked items is $220,000, and then the line items to either cut or modify is another $60,000. So the capital reductions is about $280,000. And then the BOE, I mentioned the $300,000, and then on the town side, a couple of 50,000s, lots of 5s and 10s and 15s.
All right, I think we got your capital.
Yeah, and then on the increased revenue. Again, I'm just comparing the unrestricted and restricted fund balance transfers to what we did last year.
But it has no bearing on what was done last year.
Why not?
The unrestricted fund balance is maintained at a certain level.
Right.
When Mr. Frieda generates a surplus, that fund balance goes above that level, we transfer that money in the following year into the revenue side of this budget.
Right.
So that's what we do. We don't arbitrate. We don't shift that number as to whatever we feel like we want it to be. It's whatever it is. So to arbitrarily, try and move it 10 or 20%, it doesn't work.
I see.
It's a dangerous illustration, ladies and gentlemen. We're at roughly 8.2% right now, and it will adversely affect our AAA rating if we dip into it any further. So, and the other thing I'd like to say is, because the point was made, well, years ago we had the police range remediated. This is a whole new regime and administration, and nobody knows that better than I do, because I worked closely with the previous one, and I'm working closely with this administration in Hartford. There is absolutely no guarantee that the suggestions to move those items to MRSA for a waiver, they're not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So, and I can tell everybody this, that it was my phone call to OPM that opened the door for us on waivers, period. Because when I sat in Hartford with the governor and the secretary of OPM, there were no waivers at that point. So as Ed knows, and I said this, Ed, we have a slight door opening. But every single waiver that we request, I have to go to OPM and try to get it cleared. And those items, I can tell you, will never be part of MRSA.
Thank you, Mr. Frieda. I'm trying to see if we make... Is there any other discussion on the suggestions that the minority members made to this budget? Hearing none. Mr. Hallahan?
Yes.
Can you restate your motion, and we will discuss it further? It sounds like some of Nancy's was included in yours, which I think no one has a problem with.
I believe we overlapped on the contractual replacement.
Yeah. Well, contractual replacement is the same thing.
No, I'm sorry. Contract.
Those line items we fund for contract negotiations. We used to put it in every department, but there was no reason to telegraph that information during union negotiations, and that's why we've moved it to that separate fund. Again, the numbers are what our calculations carry. It's not why it's arbitrarily just cut it. I am in agreement with some, but not all of Mr. Hallahan's suggestions, which overlap some of yours, Ms. Barrett. Is any member in agreement with changing the Board of Ed other than the minority members and reducing? Okay. I'd like to then suggest, Mr. Hallahan, we reword your motion and tell me if you're in agreement with this, and I'll have you state the motion, but reduce the debt service $250,000, $50,000 on consultant, $100,000 on medical.
Medical.
That's
400.
And that would be the extent of it. Would you be willing to make that motion without the Board of Ed?
Yes.
If you'd like to make that motion, I think we might get a second.
I would like to make the motion to, in the draft budget before us, reduce the following line items. Contracted fire marshal consultant by $50,000, 50. Medical insurance by $100,000. Debt service line $250,000. That is the motion.
Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Second.
See, Michael, everyone's on board with you. Is there any other discussion from anyone on this motion? Hearing none, I'd like to call the roll. Mr. Frieda. Mr. Frieda.
Yes, I am in agreement with that, so my vote would be yes.
Mr. Hallahan.
Yes?
Mr. Donahue.
I'm in favor.
Ms. Fiscal.
Yes.
Mr. Leonis.
I agree.
Ms. Barrett.
Just to clarify, we're talking about a $400,000 decrease on the town side, correct?
Yes.
Total. Yes, I'm in agreement.
And I also am in agreement. Is there any other motions before we move the question of the budget?
So I just had one quick question. I had a whole series of smaller cuts that could also be made, but I don't know how to efficiently do this. Or would we even be interested in entertaining them?
I don't believe, we reduced the budget by $400,000.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about $5,000 and $10,000 items, I don't see justification for small moves like that. We've already made a number of those small moves. As I said, the majority members of the board did go through this budget line item for line item. We did reduce some. We actually reduced some items by $1,500, $5,000, $10,000, $6,500. We did not see any items in addition to the ones we've already reduced that made sense to us. So I do not believe you would get support in a motion. Not to say you couldn't make it.
Right.
But I would be pretty confident the fact that at least 5 members of this board have done exactly what you just said you've done, and we've been down to those $1,500 line items, $6,500 line items, and we kind of drew the line and said that's about as far as we can go.
Mr. Chair, can I make a comment too?
Yes, Mr. Frieda.
Just out of respect for Nancy's observations. Before it even got to the Board of Finance meeting back in March, I think it was, Ed and I, and Ed's, I hope he's still on the phone, Ed and I went through the budget twice and reduced it and distilled it down on those $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 reductions before it even got to the Board of Finance. Ed, do you remember that?
Yes, I do, Mike. Yep.
So my point is, I think we've already done it. Ed and I have done it at least twice, and then the Board of Finance has already weighed in.
Yeah, no, I certainly in studying the end-of-year reports, I identified several line items that were underspent relative to the budget amounts, and several of those cuts were already made. So that was very impressive.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then I'll make a motion to move the question. Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion, I have a second. The roll call. Which one of these days I'm going to keep this thing close to me. Mr. Frieda.
Aye.
Mr. Hallahan.
Is this just to move the question, yes?
Question.
Aye, yeah.
Mr. Donahue.
Aye.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, let me back up for 1 second. Yeah, we did, Mike. Mike, we approved your thing. Ms. Secchio, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Leonis.
Aye.
Ms. Barrett.
Aye.
And Mr. Monaco votes yes. So if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Swinkowski, I'm going to read a resolution to vote on.
Can you just confirm the number with Ed before we do that, please?
Sure. Ed?
Yeah.
I showed the overall town budget at $108,691,154. And I show the Board of Ed at $57,324,245. And I show the town at $51,366,909. And I'm not sure what the mill rate would be.
Oh, we might have to do some.
Can you do that last? If you agree with those numbers, can you do the last calculation?
Yeah, I could. So, can I do that, Rich?
Excuse me?
Can I just repeat those?
Repeat the numbers.
I show the overall budget.
No, not those. the cuts? They were debt 250, health.
Sorry.
200, fire.
Yeah, the debt's 250,000. The fire consultant 50,000. In medical 100,000.
Those three.
Those three.
Right.
The
If I could just point out something, because again, this impacts the way that the debt is actually presented. The way it's recorded, again, for the second year in a row, we're doing this net debt. But I just wanted to point out the total debt for the current fiscal year is 9.1, and the total debt for next fiscal year is 9.0. The way it's reflected on in the proposed budget, it makes it look like the debt is going up by $1 million, but really the debt went down by $67,000. We just use a different coupon in the form of this debt service fund. So if we're going to increase the amount of our debt service fund, then there's going to be an even greater impact. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Do you have the revised mill rate?
I got 30.72. Let's see what Ed gets.
And just while Ed's calculating that, a little bit of history. Since Mr. Frieda has been in office and I've been chair of this board, while we go to referendum every year on the budget, 8 out of those 10 times the budget passed. So we have a good track history. And in reality, if I'm not mistaken, most of those times, I would say maybe only once or twice, the board did not vote unanimously on the budget, which is a lot to be said.
Should I name the member?
He knows who he is.
And I got 30.72. What'd you get?
Yeah, that's what he said. 30.72.
30.7 something. My calculator doesn't round that far.
All right, 7-2. We have 2 people that have said it. So, I move the following. In accordance with the resolution of the North Haven Board of Selectmen dated May 7, 2020, State of Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont's Executive Order 71, I correct that, Executive Order 7I, paragraph 13, dated March 21st, 2020, to adopt a budget for July 1, 2020 to June 30th, 2021 fiscal year and set a mill rate sufficient to pay the town's expenses for the said fiscal year. Resolved that in accordance with the resolution, the Board of Selectmen dated May 7, 2020, in the state of Governor Lamont, I'm reading the same thing, she wrote it twice, Executive Order 7I, paragraph 13, dated March 21st, 2020, and the Board of Finance, as the town's budget-making authority, adopts a budget for the July 1, 2020, June 30th, 2021 fiscal year in the amount of $108,691,154. Board of Education, $57,324,245. Town, $51,366,909, and set the mill rate at 30.72. Can I have a second?
Second.
So, Mr.
We
Chairman,
have a second.
so those would not be separate motions? It's all encompassed in one motion.
That's how it was written for me.
Well, that's the budget. We don't have 2 different budgets. We have one budget.
I only have one budget.
I understand.
Mr. Frieda.
Yes.
Mr. Hallahan.
Unfortunately, no, but thank you for the changes made on the town side.
Mr. Donahue.
I vote in favor.
Mr. Sicchio.
Yeah.
Mr. Leonis.
Yes.
Ms. Barrett.
Because there's no change on the Board of Ed side, I'm going to have to vote no.
And I vote yes. The budget passes. Being no other business, I make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Congratulations to all.
Congratulations.
And
Have a
we'll do this as live. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you all.
See you in August.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right.
Thank you. Nice job.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.